Hi everyone! This video is a bit experimental. We'll watch a C# tutorial together from another YouTube channel, and we're going to watch that video in this video. Together we'll go line by line and turn the C# into visual scripting graphs. So a big, huge thank you to fellow game dev YouTuber Eleonora, who enthusiastically agreed to us figuring out her video in this video. Thank you, Eleonora. I'll put a link to the original video below, and definitely subscribe to her channel. In fact, you'll want to watch the beginning of her video if you aren't as familiar with setting up UI elements. I want to get right to looking at the scripts, but I will quickly summarize the setup. Create an empty game object, center it in the world, and right-click, go to UI, and select Image. You can use any circle or ring graphic you have, and then on Image Component, on Image Type, select Filled, Radial 360, and make your ring segment fill amount to be 0.125. So we have 8 ring segments to our menu. Each segment is rotated by 45 degrees to complete the ring. I have parent objects for each selection, and mine are labeled by the emoji emotions. Okay, with that done, let's follow Eleonora's tutorial.
Now we can add a script to the menu items. I'm naming this MenuItemScript. So we need 3 variables, 2 colors, a hover color, and base color, and also a reference to the background image object.
The first thing Eleonora does is create a script called MenuItemScript, so let's go ahead and add a script machine component on the parent level of the first ring selection segment. Click New, and let's call this graph the same thing, MenuItemScript. You can think of scripts as a cooking recipe. The very top of the script are the libraries of things to use, what cooking appliances or pantries of food ingredients we're using. The script name is what recipe, and mono behavior is our Unity kitchen world. It gives us things like start and update, things related to triggers, collisions, and game objects. And then variables are, of course, the specific ingredients and data for our instructions, like carrots and oven temperature, all the things we need to create a dish. Let's start by declaring those color ingredients. In the inspector on the variables dropdown, type hover color. We could type any name we want here, but we're following what Eleonora is doing. Then make hover color be of type color. And let's do this again. This time we'll have another color, and we'll call it base color, and also make this of type color. Let's make another variable called background and make it of type image. This is where we're going to drop in the ring segment or circle image so we can change the color on it. And go ahead and select the color for the base color and the color when you're hovering over it. All right, then click Edit Graph and let's follow along.
So in the start function, we're gonna set the background color to the base color. And then I'm gonna go ahead and delete the update function because we don't need that. And I'm gonna define 2 new functions, select and deselect.
In the graph view, the variables panel defaults to graph variables. Any variables here can't be accessed outside this graph, and you won't see them in the inspector. So consider making graph variables if you see that the C# variables are private instead of public. We made our variables in the inspector, so we made them on the object, and any graph can access these variables from the object. That makes them public. All right, so when you're looking at a C# tutorial, keep in mind the type that you're working with. Types allow you to do certain things with data of that type. Like if we had a type orange, orange can be used for juice or for orange zest. So background is of type image. Go to the script graph, right-click, and do a search for image. And then go inside of image, and you can see all the different imagey things that we can do. The imagey thing we want to do is to set the color. And right down here we can see get color. Let's keep scrolling down. And there it is, set color. With programmer naming, you can type image.color, but I always use human naming, and it makes clear what the code is doing. You won't know exactly what word to look for, but that's great. Looking inside of types for what you need will naturally teach you all the things the various types can do. So on start, we want to set the color of the background image, and we want to set the color to be the base color. Okay, so I'm just going to organize this a little bit to give us some space. And then I'll delete the update. And now we have a function or method called select that Eleonora made. Functions are a procedure like cooking instructions. You can think of chop carrots. Or you can name it like a machine, carrot chopper. We don't have functions in visual scripting right now. Instead, we can use custom events because custom events, like methods, can be triggered. Custom events are slower than method calls. Therefore, you don't want to trigger them every frame, like an update, but select is just going to happen once in a while, so using custom events for it is perfect. Let's go ahead and make a custom event. And let's call it select.
And in select, we'll change the color to the hover color, and in this select, we'll change the color to the base color.
Okay, so let's do the same thing we did before. This time I'll type image set color, since we know what we're looking for. And just like last time, we want to set the color on the background image. And then we want to set this to be the hover color on select. Okay, so you could actually copy this one, but then you would just want to make sure to change the variable here. But I think it's really good to do some repetition when you're learning something. All right, let's check out the next part.
And in select, we'll change the color to the hover color, and in this select, we'll change the color to the base color. Also, don't forget to add using Unity Engine.ui at the top of the file, and also set the select and deselect functions to public so we can access them later.
And now let's do everything again for deselect. Make a custom event called deselect and set the image color back to base color. Eleonora makes these methods public so they can be called from other scripts. Unity visual scripting custom events are already public to anything accessing this menu selection object. We'll see that in a moment. We also don't need Unity Engine.ui because it is already included in our default visual scripting assembly libraries, and we can see that here. And before we go much further, let's go ahead and drag in the segment, the arc, or the circle fragment, whatever you're using, into the image of that selection into the background. Okay, so this is what's the color of this is going to change. It's going to be a bit of a chore to do this for all of your images. So what you might want to do is actually delete your selections and then duplicate them and rotate the image around again when we're done. Okay, let's keep going.
Now let's add a script to the parent menu item. I'm naming this MenuScript.
All right, so let's go ahead into the Radial select object. Your parent object will probably be empty. I'm using shapes by Freya Holmer here for nice, crisp shapes. You don't need it for this tutorial, but I'd highly recommend it if you do a lot of UI work. Let's do what Eleonora does and make a new script machine. I'll click New, and let's call it MenuScript or menu graph. I'm just going to add that so I don't overwrite my previous ones that are complete for my tutorial prep. Okay, and then let's edit this graph.
So what we need is the mouse position, but we need that relevant to the center of our menu, which is also the center of the screen because I've positioned the menu exactly at the center of the screen. If we debug.log the mouse position, we can see in action that the coordinates in which this is shown in start from the bottom left corner, so 0, 0 is down here, and it goes in this direction. We want to calculate what this would correspond to in a coordinate system that goes through the middle of the screen.
So she shows the corner by doing a debug log of input mouse position. So let's just go ahead and do that. I'll put these here for now. And then on update, let's just get debug log, that first one there. And then let's get input mouse position. And there it is, third one down. All right, back to Eleanor's video.
So let's go back to our script and add a variable called normalize mouse position. And in the update function, we'll set this to be a new vector to mouse position x minus half the width of the screen and mouse position y minus half the screen height. So now if we debug.log this again, we can now see that the 0, 0 position is in the middle of the screen.
All right, so let's start with making that vector2 variable. So go in object here and type normalized mouse position. And then vector2. Then we want to set this vector2 in update. So I'm going to right click on this and kind of move this down the line a little bit. I'll move it down here. And this vector2 we want to set, the visual scripting is backwards from what you're going to see in the programming. So I'm going to hold Alt, which is going to give us a set variable. Put this over here. And then we want a new vector2. So I'll add the node and we'll do new vector2. Let's see if that comes up. So new vector2 doesn't come up. What we're actually doing here is creating a vector2. Okay, and when we want xy, because we want to put the xy values in separately, which you can see down there, compared to this, where they're together, this, they're separate. Okay, and we can just plug this right in like that. Okay, so what is this vector2 going to be? Well, it's going to be the input.mouse position. So let's just sever this and put that over here. And we want to get the x. So let's do get x. We want to get the screen width and divide it by 2, and then subtract that from the x mouse position, which is going to put it in the center of the screen. And then it looks like we want to do that with the y too. So let's just go ahead and get y and get y. So there's a vector2 get y and a vector3 get y. It looks like the output of get mouse position is vector3. So let's do vector3 get y. Cool. And I don't think we're using start, so I'm just going to delete that. We can move all of this up. Okay. So screen.width. So let's just type screen get width. Okay. And then let's get the height too. Get height. Screen get height. And then we want to divide this by 2. So divide. All right. So what we want to do, oh, and of course we're subtracting. So let's do subtract. Okay, cool. So let me just move the y out of the way here and let's start with x. So x, we're subtracting the width divided by 2. And I'll connect the update and then connect this into x. So then let's do the same thing with the height. Select those and Control D duplicate, and then just plug this into divide by 2, subtract by the get y, and then put that into the y. Okay, cool. And then she has a debug log. So then we can debug this and then connect that up. Okay, so now the center of the screen should be 0, 0 for our mouse. I'm going to shut this and go ahead and test that. So the middle is 0, 0, and then going to the edges will give us other numbers. All right, back to Eleonora.
If we draw these imaginary lines going from the center of our menu through the boundaries of the menu buttons, and we end up with these sections. So we want to be able to tell in which section the mouse is, so we know what is currently being selected. And to do that, we need to get the angle between the line defined by the center of the circle and the current mouse position, and the new x-axis we defined earlier, which goes through the middle of the screen. Since we have x and y, we can use Unity's atan function to do so. However, this gives us a result in radians and we want degrees. So to do that, we're going to multiply by the radian to degrees function.
Oh no, math! All right, don't worry, we can figure this out. let's start by just mindlessly recreating what she is doing, and then I'll explain it after. And let's move this down a ways. All right, so the first thing is we need to make a public float, a new variable called current angle, and let's make it of type float. Okay, current angle is equal to, so we're going to need a set current angle, and that goes right into our debug log. So I'll connect that up. Then we want to get mathatan, the one with yx. And then we want to get the y of the normalized mouse position. Then we also want to get the x, vector2 get x. And then we can actually move this over here. Okay, so the y goes first and the x goes second. I'll explain why in a moment. And then this is multiplied by math f rad, get rad to degrees, because we're converting radians to degrees, and then these are actually multiplied together. That multiplied by that, and then we can move all this back over like that. And this is going to be our current angle. Okay, so what does this mean here? In case you haven't had trigonometry in a while, okay, so we want to find this angle. We know what y and x is because that's our mouse position. We don't know what the hypotenuse of this right triangle is. If we knew the hypotenuse, we could find the angle with sine or cosine, depending on which other side we knew. But we don't know the hypotenuse. We know the other sides, so that leaves us with tangent. The tangent of an angle is the opposite side divided by the adjacent side. So if you plug those two numbers into Unity's atan2 function, you'll get this angle. But we still have a little bit more to do.
If we debug.log this, we can see it goes from 0 to 180 in this direction and from 0 to -80 in this direction. And we don't want to have negative values. We want to go from 0 to 360. So if we go back to the script and we set the current angle equals current angle plus 360, we can add 360 to any angle and it will still be the same angle. So for example, -90 becomes 135, etc. And to avoid values over 360, we're going to do modulo. So if we go back now, our angle value goes from 0 to 360 in this direction very smoothly. Okay, next we need to calculate what section is the current angle in. We define a new variable called selection, and let's set that to the current angle divided by 360 over 8, since we have 8 menu items, which would be 45 degrees. So this section over here is 0, and it grows in the same direction as the angle variable we set earlier. There we go. Now we just need to actually select and deselect the item.
Now let's create another variable and call it selection. And this will be of type integer. Now we're doing some more math to current angle. So let's go ahead and sever the debug log and move all of this over. Just put this way over here. We are taking the current angle and we're adding 360. Okay, so let's go ahead and get an add unit. And then we have modulo, which divides our number by 360 and returns the remainder. Let's wait to see what this is doing until we press play, because we'll be able to see the values that are coming out of each of these nodes, which is another really great thing about visual scripting. Okay, so what we're doing is we are setting this to be our current angle. And then we are taking the current angle and dividing it by 45. So let's go ahead and do that. And then we are setting our selection number to be this integer. Now, we have a float here because current angle is a float, which means there are decimal places. Eleonora is casting the float as an integer to convert it. Visual scripting does this automatically, but we get some rounding problems. So if we're in the middle of a sector, it's going to round up to the next selection, which you don't want. So what I want to do is subtract 0.5 so it doesn't round up to the next selection. And I'll show you what happens with this and without this. Let's debug log our selection number. Okay, cool. Let's check this out. So remember how we used to get this number from 0 to 180 and then negative 180 to 0. So then we added 360 to this, which automatically puts us at over 360 and then under on the bottom. And then if we divide that number by 360, we get a remainder. So we're at 0 here, and we add 360 to it. But since we divide by 360, so, it's 366 divided by 360, that gives us a remainder of 6.85, okay? So let's go over. So we added 360 to this 180 number. That gives us 539.07. So 360 goes into 539 once, but then that leaves us 179.31 left, okay? So if I go to 270 degrees, 360 doesn't go into 270, so we get that whole 270 left. And, just in the same way, we can't divide 352 by 360 once, so what we have left is the entire remainder. All right, so that's now our current angle, and by dividing it at 45, we can figure out what number sector we're in, because our sectors are 1/8 of a circle. Now, we got an issue here where when we're in 0.5, it could round up. So let me show you that. I'll disconnect this and this, and let's do that. So you can see as I pass the halfway point, the way that it works is that it rounds up. And we don't want that because we still want to be in the 0 selection here and not have it go to 1. And that issue is across the board. Now we're in 2, even though we're in the first selection because it's 0, 1, 2, 3. So by subtracting by 0.5, even though it has us at negative 0.49, the selection rounds up to 0, which is what we want. Now the mouse is in the right sector that we want, so we can make the selection.
Let's go back to the script and define some more variables. We're gonna need an array of game objects to hold our menu items. We're gonna need another int to hold the previous selected item, and 2 MenuItemScript objects, one for the current selection and one for the previous selection.
So we have a couple more variables to declare. Eleonora is making an array for all of our menu items, all of our selections. Let's make a list instead. So menu items, and we're going to make it a list of type game object. List of game object. Lists are more flexible than arrays because you can add to and take away from lists dynamically. I'm going to move this over here. Okay, then we want to make an int, and she has it private. If we wanted to make it private, we can make it a graph variable, but I'm just going to keep it public for now so we can see everything that is happening in the inspector window. So let's do previous selection. And honestly, I wish we could add index to this name, but it won't do it automatically in visual scripting. We'd have to go through and rename every place that the variable is in. I'll keep referring to it as selection index and previous selection index because this is how we're going to pull items out of our list. Okay, so previous selection is an integer. And then we can actually drag this up so that selection index and previous selection index are close to each other. And then let's get menu item game object of type game object. So I am calling my variables here a little bit different because she is getting the actual script component, whereas we are getting the game object because visual scripting can automatically trigger events from the game object, and we don't need to get the script machine component. Menu item up. And then this one is previous menu item game object. Okay. And I'll make that of type game object. All right.
We only want to do this if the new selection is different than the previous one. So let's check that. And if it is, we'll grab the MenuItemScript attached to the previously selected element, which we get from the array. And we can call the deselect function on this. Now set previous to the current selection, so we keep a reference of this as well. And we go ahead and use the select function on the currently selected item.
Okay, so if our selection index is not equal to the previous selection index, then we switch the selection. So let's go ahead and get our selection index and get our previous selection index, and then let's do an if statement. If, and then we're going to need some logic not equal. So if selection is not equal to the previous selection, our mouse is in a new spot. Our previous selection, let's set that. All right, so now we're going to get our list. And then we're going to get an item from the list. So you can do get item, get list item, and the item that we want is the previous selection, which we can run into here. And this is now our previous selection object. And on that previous selection object, we want to trigger that custom event on it called deselect, what we made earlier. So let's do that. Let's run this into here and then deselect. Deselect turns the color of the segment to the base color, and then we want to trigger the select event on the currently selected object. We don't need to do a get component because we can just trigger the event on the game object we're getting from the list. We enter into this code block when our selection is different from our previous selection. When we're here, we need to make the previous selection be the same as the selection. Okay, so let's get the previous selection index and set it to be our current selection. That way we won't enter into this block of code anymore as long as our mouse stays in the same sector. Next up, we want to trigger the select custom event on our menu item that we have selected so that the color changes. So our menu item game object, let's set. And let's go into our list again. Get list item. And we want to get our new selection. And on that selection, we want to trigger the custom event select. So trigger custom event and type select. And on these custom events, the string has to match exactly to what the custom event is for it to work. So if this doesn't work, go back and check, make sure that the name is the exact same. And now we want to add the selection game objects to our list. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Start duplicating and dragging these into here. I only have this first one set up so far, so let's go ahead and try it. And it works. So since this is all complete, I'm just going to delete the other ones and then duplicate this around the canvas and rename them. And then I'll go back in and rotate them around, starting with 1. And then I'll drag them into the list. And right now everything is pink, which is fine, but it all works, no matter where our mouse is. Next, Eleonora shows us how our selection can change some text.
Now let's click play, and there we go. We are correctly detecting which items should be highlighted. As a finishing touch, let's add 2 more text elements to each menu item. One being a title and another one being the description. And we can also wrap this up in one parent object called description. Let's hide it in the editor by unchecking the box next to the name of the game object. And if we go back to the MenuItemScript, we can add new variable called description, set it to active on select and deactivate it on deselect. And there we go. I went ahead and adjusted the colors and the descriptions, and this is the final result. I really like how it turned out. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed it.
All right, I think you'll be able to figure out Eleonora's script. I decided to do things a little bit differently. Rather than have this text component, that's what the emoji is, be on every single selection and turn them on and off, what I decided to do is to have one text display component in another object, and every selection item will change the text on the text component of this one game object. That way you just have one central text display object that everything is setting, rather than a bunch of text components. Okay, so I have this emoji display, which has a text component. And then on the selection, I have emoji display, or you can do selection display, and it's of type text. And then I've just dragged that emoji display into that component for all of the different selections. Then I have a string for what we're going to set to that text component. So you can see right here, just like we did with the color, you do text, set text, and then you're setting the string to that text component. So every selection that I have has a different string value, and they're all setting that different value to that same text component inside selection display. And if you look at my deselect, which is grouped up, nothing needs to change because every new item is going to set this text to something else. So there's no need to change it back to anything because any string we set to the text is just going to overwrite whatever was there before. Now I do have some extra cool little effects here, but sadly I'm going to have to save this for another video where adding juice with Dutween and Feel by More Mountains is the focus. Congratulations, you made it to the end. We definitely covered a lot. Thanks for watching.